Hello, and welcome to Exploring Axon, a podcast where we discuss Axon Framework, Axon Server, and their ecosystem. I am your host and a software developer at Axonic, Sarah Torrey. In this episode, I spoke with the product and platform CTO at Tech Mahindra, a large Indian telecommunication sector, Pieter Pabst. Pieter is responsible for Blue Marble, which is an e-commerce software solution for telecommunication companies, as well as a configure, price, quote, omnichannel sales platform. Blue Marble system is also integrated into the telco's business support system and operations support, which allows the customers to self-activate and use a self-service interface with chatbot capability when help is needed. So considering all that is required of this platform, Pieter explained the beginnings of Blue Marble and how it evolved from a monolithic system into microservices using CQRS and Event Sourcing. He walked me through the decision-making process and how his team began by making their own in-house implementations of CQRS and event-sourced applications, and eventually choosing to use libraries and frameworks such as Axon Framework. He also explained why they decided to use Axon Server Enterprise Edition. We also discussed dealing with privacy and how they managed to handle sensitive data. Lastly, Pieter talked about the future of telecommunication and some of the services that use event sourcing, such as machine learning and 5G technology. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Pieter, and let's have a listen. Hi, Pieter. How are you today? Thank you so much for joining me.
Yes, thank you. I'm all good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for being here. And I'm excited to talk to you about some really cool stuff regarding telecommunication and microservices and so on. But before we get there, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Where are you located? A little bit about your background that you'd like to share?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Pieter. I'm pronouncing it in Dutch. I'm from the Netherlands, so Pieter Pabst.
Awesome. And I'm so Americanizing it, Pieter.
Yeah, and you
Apologies
have
for that.
Yeah, you have the beer with my last name as well. I'm always interested in how you pronounce it actually in English.
Pabst.
Pabst. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm Pieter Pabst in your language.
Okay. I'm
Uh,
glad we clarified that. Go ahead.
Um, I'm located in the Netherlands, southern parts of the Netherlands. I know for most listeners, probably the Netherlands is a tiny dot on a map somewhere, but I'm in the southern parts of that. You can drive to the other parts of the country in like 3 hours, so it's a very
Right.
small country.
Yeah.
I'm all the way down south to the Belgian border, and on the other side is the German border.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. And what do you do, Pieter? And what is your background?
Yeah, so I'm currently working as a product and platform CTO in a company called Tech Mahindra, which is located in India. It's far away
Right.
from my home location. So there's
So
a bit of
you're
a
currently working with two crazy time zones. One, I'm in the US talking to me, and then you have people in
yeah.
India.
Well,
Yeah,
if that was all, then my life would be easy. But no, we
that.
Techem is a very big customer, a very
Yeah.
big company, and we have customers all over the world. So there's no lack of time zones to work in. So
Right.
that's the case. But yeah, I'm responsible for a product there called Blue Marble. Blue
Mm-hmm.
Marble is a software which uses CQRS and Event Sourcing as some of its architectural principles. That's how we got to be in this talk.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but there's some history to this. So I used to be specializing specifically in e-commerce. I
Mm-hmm.
used to have a company in doing that, like a little agency, while I was in university.
Okay.
Um, and I got hired by a client, for one of my clients,
Mm-hmm.
who were building a software solution in the telco space
Okay.
as a consultant. And I started out there, and eventually that thing grew and grew and grew into a spin-off. The owner of that acquired my company, so I could work there with all of my people in
Mm-hmm.
that thing full time. I had few positions, became the
Right.
CTO over there, and that spin-off eventually was acquired by Tech Mahindra, so acquired by a
Okay.
company from the other side of the world, and that's how I came to be in TechM. Very short version
Very short version,
of
a
that life.
very,
Yeah.
very interesting, eventful um, Past. So you talked about your university. So did you study computer science there and
Software engineering.
software engineering?
I
Okay.
have a bachelor in software engineering, and I have a bachelor in network infrastructure design.
Okay. Okay.
And
So
before
that's where
that,
your
I
interest
did
came.
something in yeah, yeah. I got through some hoops. I got here. I before
Mhm.
this, I used to be in industrial automation, so PLCs, SCADA,
Yeah.
electronics on in factories and stuff like that. That's what I
Yeah.
did for a brief period. So
Yeah.
I'm also an electrician by trade. Actually, I'm a certified electrician
That's awesome.
somewhere in my history. But yeah,
Yeah.
from there I got into software engineering and yeah, to where I am today in the telco space.
That's really great. So I did promise right before we started recording that I wouldn't talk about, or I wouldn't ask you about, when your world started and start from the very beginning. But I'm curious, were you one of those kids who like to take things apart and put them back
Oh
together, that kind of
yes,
thing?
yes, very much so.
Right.
Radios, computers, mopeds. Yes, this is what I like to do. I sometimes I even manage to put them back together. Although
Right.
the breaking down often was easier
It's
than
always more
building it
fun
back
too,
up
right?
again. Yeah, it's more fun as
Exactly.
well. Yes, yes.
Exactly. I ask, yeah, my husband likes to take things apart, and we have this joke that sometimes when he puts them back together, he ends up with extra screws, and we call them extra parts, right? They're not necessary. And now our two boys who are 5 and 3, they like to take things apart and just go in there and discover things. So, yeah, this is going to be fun.
That's how you learn, and that's how you might
Exactly.
end up being a CTO in a telco space in
And an
India somewhere.
engineer, yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
absolutely. So good stuff. So tell me a little bit about Tech Mahindra as a whole. It is a very large company, sort of to give maybe the US listeners an idea, similar to maybe like AT&T or Verizon, although probably bigger. So give us an idea, what does it do, what kind of
Yeah.
services
Yeah,
do they
so
provide?
it's a huge system integrator from India, and actually they are located in the U.S. They have a good U.S. presence as well.
Mm-hmm.
So they have
Right.
many customers there, and it's no secret that AT&T, for example, is one of them,
Right.
one of the key accounts for Tech Mahindra.
Right.
There are close to, and now I didn't study all these numbers, so forgive me if I make
No, you're
a
fine.
mistake left or right, but over 140,000 people in Tech Mahindra.
Wow.
Tech Mahindra also has a parent company, a group company, and that's like a conglomerate of all kinds of industries, from agriculture to cars. Mahindra makes
Okay.
cars
Nice.
in India, and I think some of those at some point were exported to the US as well. There might be a interesting story there, but
Yeah, definitely.
I'm not aware of those details. So it's yeah, the gist of it is a very big company.
Yeah.
It's competition would be like an Infosys, a TCS to some extent, an Accenture.
Hmm.
These would be Cognizant. These would be companies that TechM typically competes with. And
Right.
TechM is specifically strong in the telco sector. Very, very,
Mhm.
very, very long back, it started as I don't know if you can call it a spin-off or a joint venture. I'm not sure about the exact term, but it started
Yeah.
in between Mahindra Group and BT in the UK, British
Hmm.
Telecom.
Yeah.
So it has its histories as well, its origins in telco. Well,
Yeah.
it is in
That's
every industry today, but yeah,
that's
telco
where it started.
specifically is
Yeah.
where it has its strength. Yeah,
Awesome. So you mentioned Blue Marble, which is the basically technology or maybe a
it's a product. Yeah, it's a
product of
yeah,
Tech Mahindra that you currently are managing and you're very much
correct.
involved with. So um, was Blue Marble the agency that you had before, or the product that you had
No, no, no,
before that was
no, no, no.
acquired, or it was just something completely different?
Lots of evolutions between then and there,
And
but
Blue Marble. Okay, gotcha.
yeah. So no, there were some acquisitions along the way. A company called
Mhm.
Dynacommerce, which was the one I was working for, was
Yeah.
one of those. I used to have a
Right. Right.
company which was called Rapid Commerce. There's some overlap
Mhm.
there,
Right.
but no, the current today's Blue Marble as a product is a result of some acquisitions and
Mhm.
some of in-house built IP within Tech Mahindra
Gotcha.
itself. Yeah.
And what does Blue Marble do? What is this
Yeah.
product?
Yeah, so it's a it's a sales platform, and you can
Hmm.
imagine that if you go to an AT&T or a Verizon
Yeah.
or a Comcast or whatever there is in your
All of my
market,
favorites. Yes.
yeah, or a
Right.
Vodafone or a BT in my market, just to throw in some names, not to
Right.
have any conflicts. But if you go like to one of those companies, those are our end customers, not specifically anyone that I can say, but
Yeah.
that is the market that we work in.
Hmm.
Um, they provide services to their customers. So your cellular service, as an example, or
Right.
your video streaming, or your fixed telephone line, or your fixed broadband line. Um, and they often sell those services together with goods. Like when you buy a new phone, you will often pair it with
A
maybe
headset
an
or yeah.
upgrade. Yeah, yeah, an headset, but maybe an upgrade
Oh,
with your
sure. The
postpaid
service itself.
subscription, or
Right.
right. So you combine the services with the goods element, and that's
Hmm.
really the angle that we come from. So we provide a system for telcos which allows them to sell products and services to their customers. That's a very simple example of it.
Yeah.
And I think many people can imagine e-commerce, right? You have a
Right.
catalog where you define your products. You have a shopping cart where you put them in when you're buying them. Then you check them out. You have to put in some data, and that results into an order.
Yeah.
It's very much like that, except in telco there are a lot of additional dimensions to that. So for one, what you are buying will often have a variety of ways that you pay for it, right? So you have
Right.
charges when you use it. You have things that you pay recurringly, like a monthly bill or a weekly bill or whatever
Yeah.
bill. There's charges you have to pay up front, and those might be paid for in a traditional way with a credit card, or they might go on your first bill, as an example.
Sure.
So there's a lot of complexity from that angle. Also, there's one big difference with traditional e-commerce. If you have something, like you have an existing service, like maybe you have an existing postpaid subscription. Postpaid means I pay it in a bill. Uh, and then you're buying something else, like maybe a fixed line, a broadband, a fiber, or maybe you're buying a streaming service. Then what you have will influence what you can get. And then when you have a contract with it, of course, you cannot always terminate. Sometimes you can, sometimes you cannot, sometimes you can prolong. Sometimes you have to pay a penalty if you terminate. All those kind of complexities are something that we deal with. And then if you have the service aspect with the physical goods aspect, well, when you activate or when you buy a subscription, it has to be activated on the network. Your eSIM, your physical SIM card. If you buy it online, preferably you get the device at your house and it's working when you get it, right? Or like a modem or a handset, whatever. All these things
Yeah.
go together, and they form all these nice complexities which the software deals with. Yeah.
This is really fascinating. This gives me a whole new perspective of how my personal phone bill probably works. I have to go dig in there and figure out
Yeah.
what's in there. This is really fascinating stuff that I personally hadn't really put much thought about it. But yeah, definitely they have to be managed, and uh, also they have to be able to with as the customers grow, and as your basically audience grows, you have to be able to scale as well. So that's one of the things that I think was a definite challenge for you, and
Yeah.
that's kind of what brings us to this whole complex situation with, okay, do you have a monolith at the beginning? Did you have a
Yeah.
monolith at the beginning
Yeah.
with your
Yeah. We,
system,
we
and then
yeah
how
we,
did you evolve
yeah.
it?
Yeah, we very much did. So the element of scale. Now imagine you're tier one, as we call that. So you're a big telco with its own network. Probably we call that a tier one, certain size, probably
Yeah.
your own network. In some countries, like India or the US or Germany or Russia or other markets, um, you can have up to 100 million or even more subscribers, right?
Right.
And as a subscriber, you interact with our platform. It's not just when you buy something the first time, it's also
Right.
when you change what you have, right? So you will use your self care app probably. You
Mhm.
add a data roaming bundle, or you add a Netflix or whatever streaming services is there, an HBO maybe on your end. Um,
Yeah.
and that interaction goes through this platform as well. So there's quite some interaction with this platform from end users directly. When you walk into the store, when the agent helps you, he's interacting with this platform to see what you have, to see what you might buy, or what you should buy, or what you can buy. When you call the call center, the same story. Or when they call you, right, outbound as well, right? You're being targeted for some reason. Maybe your subscription is ending, or maybe they like you a lot and want to make you an offer. Probably
Right.
just when you're having dinner, right? That's when they'll call you. Um,
Exactly.
so all these all these
Or when the
interactions
kids are
go
having a tantrum,
through.
right?
Exactly, that's when they call you. That's we
Exactly.
put that in the software as a feature. That's but
It's like you
yeah,
have a
all these.
camera in my life when to call. Yeah, exactly.
I'm not at liberty to talk about that, but
Oh,
no, but
great.
all these interactions, they yeah,
Right.
they generate lots of transactions, and they generate lots of data, right?
Right.
Um, so scaling for sure is a challenge, and then also when you sit in the upper parts of the system, like we do, close to the channels as we call them, then you expect that interaction to go quickly, right? You don't want to, for example, or a silly example, you don't want to wait 5 seconds for your self-care page to show up, or 3 seconds for your product detail page on an eShop. You don't want to wait for your app to start up. All these things need to be pretty snappy. Otherwise, you'll be considering a competitor, right? If all of that is very slow and you have to go through that all the time, you might look at other options in the market, right? So in the
Right.
customer
Exactly.
experience part, where we sit close to, not just the factor of scale, which is there,
Hmm.
but also the response times of things are very important. Now, that is not necessarily how we got into this set of architectural patterns. So we originally built for a way smaller market than the type of markets we serve today. So our first customer, I think, was between 3 million and 5 million subscribers.
Okay.
And for today's terms, that's not a lot, right? We go
Right.
up to 100 million. So uh, we started in a way smaller
Yeah.
mindset, and then also we started in predominantly original the assisted channel, so where an agent is interacting with the customer, not directly the digital channels, and there's way less load there, and it's way more predictable because so many people working in the system, right? Your employees are working there. So we started off in a monolithic architecture. The first versions of first a project, and later it became a product. They had to be delivered quickly. It was based on a lot of open source software as well. And it was a very monolithic architecture, service oriented kind of architecture, with some monolithic front ends, MVC applications sitting on top. That's how the
And in
solution
terms of
started out.
yeah, and in terms of time, what year are we talking about when you first started
This
this
is 8 years
application?
back. 8 years,
8 years.
8 years
Okay. All
back.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So then
So
that's where you started, and yeah.
yeah, yeah, that is where we started out in live, and we started with, as small companies do, we started with one team of developers. We were starting with one customer, and then things start scaling, right? So then you get more customers, and to serve more customers, you need to accelerate your roadmap, or to get a bigger chunk of the market, you need to accelerate your roadmap, which means you add developers. Your functional areas expand, right? There's more functionality in your application, so more teams will come.
Right.
Teams need to be driven by other people, right? Product owners,
Yeah.
product managers, whatever structure that you're following. Like stakeholders, more and more stakeholders
Of
will
course.
come if
Yeah.
you have more demands. Yeah.
Right. Definitely.
So that will happen to your application, and then you're basically looking at working with a lot of people on a single code base where everything is tightly coupled together, right? So that is
Yeah.
when we first started looking at new types of architectural styles
Hmm.
to deal with that scaling problem. At that point, not necessarily from a runtime scaling perspective, right? So serving a lot of traffic on your platform, more from an
Yeah.
organizational perspective is how we got into this.
And did you have an idea of where you wanted to go, or was it some sort of trial and error period where you kind of tried different technologies, different architectural designs, and then decided, hey, this particular
Yeah,
thing maybe is not working, maybe we try something different. Yeah, so how was your process?
yeah.
Can you kind of walk me
It
through it?
evolved. It evolved a lot, right? So we started
Yeah.
out in basically a monolithic PHP-based
Hmm.
application, MVC, Xen
Okay.
framework, and later Lumen, whatever was there.
Yeah.
And then there different teams came in, different part of the organization. The back end of that predominantly was in .NET,
Okay.
and that is how we had the first few iterations of the product, and then scalability, managing technical depth, agility. Became challenges, and
Yeah.
we basically decided that we would want to start completely over again. So we had all these learnings, and we were in the third iteration of the product. We were building what was supposed to be, or which was going to be the V3 GA
Yeah.
release, and we started completely from scratch there. And we decided on, yeah, well, it's hyped as a name these days. Some people don't even want me to use it anymore, but the microservice architecture thing we got into at that point. And
Hmm.
one of the architects in my team, he had worked with CQRS and Event Sourcing before, and he was a big
Okay.
advocate of the same.
Hmm.
And we built some services in that architectural style, first to, let's say, complement our monolithic application.
Right.
And then later on, we started, once we had some experience in that, we said, okay, this is the way. And we started rebuilding the entire project, a product in that architectural style from scratch. And we actually started using Java
Hmm.
at that point in time to do it, which was not 100% a technology choice.
Yeah.
It was a skill choice. It was the skill set that we had available in the organization at that time.
Okay. Yeah.
Java very well established in the telecommunications industry. Oracle has a lot of products in telco as well. So that is where, if you look at developers who had experience with domain knowledge of the domain we were sitting, they were often Java developers, and so we
Right.
had a lot of those, and
Yeah.
that is one of the contributors to go for a Java stack back then.
Yeah.
Um, we started with event sourcing and CQRS with our own implementation, and we had a very
Okay.
big discussion in the architecture team. Are we, using this pattern consistently for everything? Are we using it only for some services, and are we using different styles in other parts of the system? Are we going for a library approach or going for a framework approach? Will we do it from scratch, or will we adopt one of the frameworks which are out there? We did a lot of POCs, we did a lot of testing, and we had a very, very strong engineering team back then already. And initially, we decided that we would do this ourselves. So
Okay.
we created our own CQRS event sourcing library in Java, predominantly supporting generic infrastructure options like MySQL, like a Kafka or a RabbitMQ, various options which we supported. And the first iterations actually used that. And it worked. It even worked quite well.
Yeah.
So that is how we started out live, and we had a good knowledge of all of this in house, because we built all of this.
Exactly.
Um, so from there, challenges were mainly in initially resourcing. So CQRS and event sourcing are quite complex patterns, and they are, not every developer's bread and butter, right? It's
Sure.
it's a
Yeah.
different way of thinking. It's a different way of problem solving. And you're not going to source a lot of people from the market who have those skill sets from the get-go.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, and if you build something in house, then finding some people in the market for something which you build internally, of course, is impossible, right? So
Yeah.
scaling of those skill sets, scaling of those teams became one of the first challenges that we run into.
Absolutely. So I have a few questions based on what you just explained about this
Yep.
really complex and also fascinating process of moving from a monolithic system into microservices. Um, Sort of going back a little bit and rewind, you mentioned that, so there were a few things that really uh, got my interest. One is that you said you decided to basically build the system from scratch. Did you, but then you had some systems that were still communicating with this monolithic system that you had in the first place. So did you decide to create these maybe two or three other systems that were communicating with your original system in CQRS event sourced based kind of applications? And then did you then, after that, decided to completely discard your uh, first application that you had?
Yeah.
How did that work exactly?
Yeah, so we started off with a decomposition strategy where we said
Okay.
that, let's say we have the functionality in our monolith. This was a very simple example. It was about customer search, actually. So
Yeah.
you're a rep in a store or in a call center, and
Mhm.
somebody starts interacting with you, then you have to find that person.
Right.
That sounds very straightforward, but there's lots of complexities involved there in the
Involves a
telco
lot. Yeah.
domain. For
Yeah.
example, you might have multiple accounts, and we need to identify that you are the same person.
Hmm.
There's a GDPR and other kind of
Privacy
regulatory.
regulations. Yeah, exactly.
So there's a lot of considerations there,
Right.
and that was our first implementation with our first mature after all the POCs, first mature implementation with CQRS and Event Sourcing. We
Hmm.
basically decided to put it as, let's say, something which sat next to the monolithic application which was there, right? So
Yeah.
from the front end, which was served by the monolithic application, some Ajax calls would go into this new microservice when she started searching for a customer. We did that by
Okay.
giving it its own little front end in React, which was embedded in the monolithic front end, let's say, and making callouts into this microservice. That's actually something we started repeating a few times. Um, and we did that predominantly for new functionality which we were adding. But at some point we had to deal with what we had before, and that's when we really said, okay, we'll start completely
From scratch.
from zero. We'll use
Yeah.
what we've learned,
Hmm.
but we'll start it from zero, get rid of all the technical debt,
Yeah.
and start from there. So that's how that process went.
Gotcha. And you mentioned there were two things that I want to ask you about. So one was the mindset. Of course, when you're trying to move into using a whole new technology, it's not just about the learning curve. Of course, you have a set of really intelligent people with you, kind of making these decisions together with you. But so the learning curve happens, right? You can go and learn about these architectural concepts, or if you're moving from .NET to Java, you can, learn this new language or what have you. But it's that mindset that a lot of times kind of stops people from moving forward, because they're very much used to one thing, and now you're basically turning it upside down and breaking into pieces, and getting
Yeah.
sort of on board with this whole process can be challenging. Was it challenging in in
Oh,
your team?
oh yes, very much. So when you're an architect, you have a kind of a helicopter view of everything which is going on. Now, when you
Hmm.
sit in a specific functional team or Scrum team or whatever terminology or organizational structure you're following,
Yeah.
then you're very much focused on single thing.
Right.
And um, it took a lot of time convincing some domains and
Mhm.
others less so, but some domains that this complexity was warranted.
Yeah,
That changing this approach and adding complexity, CQRS, in my opinion, is one of these things which does add complexity. It doesn't come for
absolutely.
free. The
Yeah.
benefits you don't just get them. There's complexity involved in that, and it
Right.
was not easy to explain everybody
Hmm.
why that was justified. And in retrospective, there might even have been some domains where I might have done it without CQRS and event sourcing,
And
but
had good results too,
for
probably.
and had good results as well. But
Yeah.
from a consistency perspective, and later on,
Right.
I do think that's a good choice. We decided to adopt these approaches
Hmm.
over the entire spectrum, and not
Yeah.
everybody was on board from the get go,
Yeah.
especially because this library approach, which we chose in the beginning, um, required developers to have um, quite some knowledge in depth
Yeah.
to successfully apply it.
Of
And
course. Yeah.
then once you pass the stage of development, you need to operate this thing.
Hmm.
And in our case, there are multiple instances of it being operated, right? Originally,
Right.
we delivered predominantly on private clouds, and in those days, 7 years back,
Yeah.
6 years back.
Yeah.
So that was operational teams that either we as a TechM would put there, or the customer themselves had
Hmm.
operating this system. And then predominantly it would sit on a MySQL, and it would sit on a Kafka or a RabbitMQ as the default choices there.
Yeah.
Um, but if you are a DBA
Mhm.
and you've seen applications on a relational database with an ORM before, you have a certain way that you expect data to be there. Now all of a sudden you have these two components, a message broker and a relational database as an event store. It's denormalized, or the structure is gone. You're no longer seeing your tables. You're no longer seeing the queries as you'd expect them.
Of
Um,
course, and that's nerve
then there
wracking
is this
to begin
projection
with. Yeah,
database there as well.
of course.
And in our case, we had some projection databases. So in Elastic and Mongo, we used in that space and still do. And then all of the sudden, for these operational guys, also life gets a lot complexer. And then when you develop all of that infrastructural code yourself, you also need to support all of that, which is quite a big investment to make. Not just do I need to find the architects and the developers, and do they all need to understand this pattern purely at theoretical books with our own implementation. I now also need to have a lot of operational teams understanding this, and that's where we realized that we that is not our core business. Our core business is to bring business value to our telco customers and functionalities that we bring them, not in implementing CQRS libraries.
Of
um,
course.
and that is when we started looking at available open
Frameworks.
source implementations in the market,
Right.
frameworks and libraries and the like,
Yeah.
and we started benchmarking those, and that's how we eventually ended up at Axon, which happened to be a Dutch company, which I didn't
Of
know.
course. Yeah.
So
Oh, you didn't know
yeah,
that at the time.
I didn't know that. I had no clue.
Okay.
Actually,
Yeah.
yeah, I had no clue there was a company behind it initially.
Right.
We thought it was just an open source project before, and it
Mhm.
had some traction. And the way that things were done, the way that things were abstracted, let's say complexities were abstracted from our developers, is what really
Mhm.
really appealed to me. So we POC'd few of these frameworks, and actually ended up selecting an Axon to adopt, and then we rebased the entire product over a few releases to an Axon framework.
Axon Framework application. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so of course, at that point, you were very familiar with the patterns and the concept
Yes.
itself.
In
So
depth. In depth.
exactly, because you started building it sort of on your own in your own team, then
Yeah.
moving to a framework, I can imagine, was not as maybe challenging because you're already very familiar with the concept. And
Yes, you have a
yeah.
good group of core people who truly understand what it is
Hmm.
about, so you don't need to go all of that learning process again. You learn
Hmm.
everything the hard way, but then you
Yeah,
also appreciate the small things, right? Because it's
of
easy
course.
to say, okay, I have an event store and I'll write my events there and then I'll throw them on a bus. Uh, but then, how do I handle replays? How do I handle item potency? How do I handle truly scaling this thing with multiple instances? Uh,
Right.
how do I handle consistency? That is also not a small problem in a
Exactly.
CQRS implementation. All these things you have to deal with
Mhm.
yourself if you're writing that implementation, and for sure that's not impossible.
Yeah.
But from a business perspective, it just didn't make sense investing that amount of money. And then there's
Yeah.
another dimension as well, from let's say a CTO or a CIO perspective,
Mhm.
um, which is that if you have a vendor supporting your relational database and you have a vendor supporting your message broker, they of course will do that as per their SLAs. But they often also do not understand this pattern where those two things come together. So they are not going to support it on a high level. They're going to support it, once you do the query into the database or once you connect to the queue or whatever. You don't get an overarching partner that supports the entire thing with their own expertise and with their own innovation. So all of that you have to do on your own, which just adds the need for subject matter experts to be there, which explodes, let's say, the resource need that you have. And that is why, which was another reason that Axon for us. This sounds like I'm making an Axon commercial now. Don't get me wrong. I also
It's
have
good.
my
It's
my
working for me
challenges,
now.
but
Just
uh, but in this
And
in
now
this
we come to
case,
the conclusion of this. No, I'm
yeah,
just kidding. But it's actually I'm really glad that you came to this point because I was going to ask you. You did mention that you were using other databases and systems like
yes,
MongoDB or RabbitMQ, and you were using Elasticsearch and all of that. So at some point, you decided that, okay, so instead of having various experts and various platforms, let's use Axon Server because it works very well with Axon Framework. It's
Yeah,
purpose built. It's, it does the job properly.
yeah.
I'm assuming for you guys, and that's why you went with it. How was the transition? Kind of maybe tell me more about it
Yeah,
because you had a
no,
little bit of
there's yeah, there's few angles to this. So
yeah,
from a development perspective, of course, less relevant because yeah, you're
sure,
working on the framework predominantly, and it does
hmm,
support open source options in that space as well.
right,
This was really a choice driven from two angles.
hmm,
One, of course, is the one that I mentioned. So it's an operational choice where you have a single vendor, a single partner who will give you an SLA
right,
plus training material to enable your people in a single
exactly,
package,
right,
which is very appealing from a commercial perspective. From a technology perspective, one of the challenges we started facing is that if you can imagine if you handle 10 20 30 50 100 million customers
yeah,
on a platform, that scalability is a thing. Now, of course, none of our customers run something which isn't high available.
right,
But then you get into customers who run in multi-geo or multi-availability zones, multiple
hmm,
data centers,
hmm,
and then you have to deal with state in three distinct different solutions. You have it in your event store, which might be on a relational database, which is a challenge to scale
yeah,
on its own. And sometimes you have it in a message broker to some extent. You have it in your projection stores. So you have a lot of state spread over the system. And then to make sure that that is high available, that that is replicated, and that it doesn't go out of sync, and that it doesn't cause consistency issues, that is a real challenge.
yeah, of
Um,
course,
and that was another driver to look at Axon, because it's
right,
only a single component that then takes the responsibility. Not 100% true. We still use separate projection stores, but
right,
at least for the source of truth, the mastery of the data, there's one component um, that handles its replication, and that handles high availability with raft in the case of
mhm,
Axon Server.
yeah,
And that was a big driver to to standardize on Axon Server. That's
sure, yeah,
eventually what we ended up doing. Even though Axon's framework supports multiple options,
right.
for our customers, we have a big solution to test, certify, support with a big support and delivery organization behind it. So that's why we standardized on an Axon Server eventually there.
Gotcha. And you mentioned something a little bit earlier about kind of this whole onboarding process. And as in terms of the development, of course, your developers can do certain things, or if they're not on board with it, maybe they don't continue with your team or what have you. But since you are in more of a managerial position in the business side of things, um, can you tell me a little bit about the process of getting the company sort of onboarded with this change? Did you have any challenges doing so? Of course, there's always cost involved. And how did you kind of overcome those challenges? And did you personally have any reservations about whether or not this was a good
Yes.
path to go?
Yeah, so at this point in time, I wasn't in the position in the organization as a CTO that I was the guy to convince. So I
Yeah.
didn't have to convince anyone else. I was mainly the
Okay.
guy
You were convincing
to
yourself,
convince it.
basically.
It was my yeah, it was my responsibility. So
Gotcha.
CEO doesn't really care, which databases you pick, but
Of course.
yeah, there's a cost to each and every one of those, right? And
Mhm.
including Axon. Axon also isn't for free, the enterprise version,
Yeah,
which
of
we need
course.
because of high availability. So
Right.
uh, I for sure had reservations. I'm a very pragmatic guy, and I
Hmm.
do not like complexity. And unfortunately, there is a lot of complexity
Exactly.
in these patterns, right? So
Right.
it was absolutely not my first choice. But these
Okay.
patterns do allow you
Fair
to
enough.
solve problems
Right.
which were an issue in our application before. So, for
Mhm.
example, um, creating an open architecture. So, if you create a monolithic application, there are very few places that you can hook into, except
Mhm.
that when you purposely add an API to do something with, or add a webhook to do something with.
Right.
In event sourcing, when you propagate those events and you can hook into them and you can react on them and you can use those to feed your data warehouse, you can use those to trigger something in your real-time decisioning or in your BPMN, whatever you have.
Right.
You create an open architecture, which was basically forcing us to build a system in an open way without us having to think about it constantly and make changes, which made it easier for delivery teams to take this product. And as if
Yeah.
you take a product, you take it as is. You don't take a source code or something. You take binaries,
Right.
and it made it easier for them to extend that,
Yeah.
which is something that we do in our tier one customers. They'll buy something, but they'll want all kinds of stuff with it, and they
With
want it
it, exactly.
integrated, and
Right.
they want to have the data in their data warehouse, and all of that. So that open
Yeah.
architecture perspective, that made a lot of sense. The event-driven thing before made a lot of sense, but then
Yeah.
specifically event sourcing forces you to have not those events as a side effect, but inherently there are events of everything which changes in state. Rather, you thought that you needed that or not. You create that pattern that way, and it creates a very
Yeah.
open architecture.
Yeah.
And then there are other things which we needed to do anyways. For example, auditing. So
Right.
the
Right.
audit trail, the immutable events, and all of that. I'm sure all the listeners are well aware of all those arguments. But in the enterprise space, that's something you always need to do. There's always a requirement, right? This is a system where there are sales. It's a public facing system, so it's also sensitive. You'll find from time to time, right, that products leak. Like there's a new product, a new phone being announced, but there's some vendor who accidentally puts online the product detail page, leaking information about the product. So even from that perspective, not just the obvious stuff like payments and bills and orders, but even on that space, just adding a product can be sensitive, um, and that is where that angle of immutability, really helps.
Yeah.
Um, Plus the data insights, right? So a lot of
Exactly.
these things started making sense to me when I got into it, thinking that okay, yeah, these are things we used to do before, but usually as an afterthought, right? There's a separate sprint, a separate functionality, a separate module. So we need to do these things anyways, and in these patterns we got some of these things implicit, of course, at the cost of some other complexity which was there. So just for our situation, for our domain, for the things we needed to do, it started to make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Um, and then the main challenge initially was that the engineering costs were multiplied because of the complexity.
Of
So we
course.
had to
Yeah.
take that away, and that is where Axon helped a lot, right? It's quite an easy framework to get into as a Java developer. So
Yeah.
there's way less of a learning curve versus what we did before, and the same is true for operational folks, right?
Right.
So those were really the USPs from an Axon if you talk about it from a commercial angle versus the doing everything in house, having different message broker, different event store, different projection stores, and a lot of moving parts in the solution as a whole. And then, of
Exactly.
course, those databases, some developers might not get in their mindset, but okay, they are free, right? I don't need to pay for those.
Yeah.
But in the enterprise world, that isn't true. You'll get requirements like certain availability and support requirements, even on an open source database, which
Mhm.
has a GPL license, whatever. You're
Mhm.
going to need to support that. And then if you look at the commercial open source kind of model, like a Mongo has
Mhm.
or an Elastic has, you'll find that the things that they put in the enterprise version are usually the things that you need
That
to
you actually need.
confirm to in the enterprise. So
Exactly. Right.
you still end up buying licenses for those
Yeah.
because yeah, the requirements which are there mandate, for example, an encryption at rest are those
Mhm.
kind of requirements to be there.
Yeah, and in your line of business, there's a lot of sensitive information that you have to deal with, and there's a lot
Very
of
much so.
things that have to do with, as you mentioned, not only the client's data and the customers that are using these products, but also in terms of the products themselves, what you want to be shared, what can leak, and all of that stuff. So, in terms of keeping sensitive data and protecting that sensitive data, was it something that you also used Axon Framework, because we do have a data protection
Yeah,
module
we
that
use
we use that.
Axon
Yeah.
DP. Yeah,
Okay.
for GDPR compliance,
Right.
which is the obvious use case.
Yeah.
But of course, there is more to it. So
Mhm.
um, encrypting the data as selectively as possible and as early as possible.
Yeah.
Um, Make sure that the data remains encrypted throughout the rest of the ecosystem, right? So um, while we have projection stores like a Mongo, which are not an Axon,
Right.
by encrypting it early in the application, as we can do with Axon DP,
Mm-hmm.
it will make sure that everywhere where this data ends up, it's still encrypted,
It is
right? And it
encrypted.
gives us
Right.
an easy path to manage, the data in the system and the keys for the encryption, so we can comply with a GDPR, for example,
Of course. Yeah.
um, while still retaining valuable business information, right? So rather
Right.
than going into maybe in the traditional world, go into your RDBMS,
Mm-hmm.
go in there and purge your tables or delete your rows or whatever it is you do there to comply with the right to be forgotten.
Yep.
Here, we can retain the data we're allowed to retain, which is very valuable business insights later on,
Yeah.
right? I still
Yeah.
know that
Absolutely.
there was a customer who bought something. I don't know
Yeah.
who that customer is, but I
Right.
know that they bought something. I
You
know
have the
how they
gist
bought
of the
it.
information. Yeah. Exactly.
Right. So I have that as an additional. Plus, then if you look at some of the data sources that I mentioned as a projection store, and then the commercial element as well, to go for an enterprise version or go for an open source version and buy support from a vendor. Well,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that this Axon DP approach brings in is that you can keep your data encrypted at rest as well in other sources where you're keeping it. Or
Right.
if accidentally, you're logging too much, maybe that happens in production from time to
Mm-hmm.
time, right?
Right.
So we're logging messages as an example, or we're logging calls between systems. Then I also make sure that that information will not cause leakage, right? Because that information
Mm-hmm.
remains encrypted even in those logs. So yeah, that's another solution which we adopted pretty quickly. And you have to, in the event sourcing world, you have to do that when you're in the enterprise space because of GDPR. So it's a no-brainer.
Exactly.
But yeah, we do use it, and it has more benefits than just GDPR.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do apply it in our product.
That's great.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, yeah, lots to have to consider and make these decisions, and it's good to be, I guess, in that position where you have options and you have choices, and you can go with what makes perfect sense for your business case, which is really really fascinating and interesting. And I really appreciate you sharing all of that with me. So, what's next for you? Are you guys still going into more complex patterns? Are you kind of staying where you are? Is this working long term,
Oh
or
yes,
it's
yeah. Well,
always evolving?
there's a lot of so the telco industry is going through an interesting process to begin with. So the 5G,
Yeah.
you've heard about it
Yes.
before, I'm
Right.
sure. So 5G, except from the technology point of view, is supposed to be a turning point for our customers, the telcos. They
Yeah.
happen to have allowed themselves to become commodity, right? You have these
Yeah.
open-ended data plans, open everything, open term, open. You basically get unlimited for a fixed amount of money each month, and there's very little that they can do to differentiate themselves because the next one does exactly the same. So you have
Right.
two or three of these in each market, tier ones, and they have become pretty much commodity. So their business model, the way that they make money, has shifted from the early days, paying per minute, paying per SMS, paying per everything you do, into having everything unlimited for a fixed amount of money each month. And then there are very bold companies who take that very far and who compete others out of the market. And so what the telco industry is looking at is for different ways to monetize their services, and 5G will bring some of those models, specifically, for example, in the B2B space. So 5G will allow way more things to be connected, like your car and your washing machine and your lights and the things you might already be locally doing on your Wi-Fi network.
Right.
And
Which reminds me, you said washing machine. We just bought a set of washer and dryer, and it's like you can control this on your mobile. And I was like, oh my
of
gosh,
course,
one
yeah.
more app on my cell phone.
Now this will be your Wi-Fi which you require, but all of that will move on the
Right.
internet directly with 5G, right? Including your car and all kinds of
Yeah.
other things. So the way they are going to charge for this, the way they are going to make money out of this, is going to change, and that's driving a lot
Hmm.
of developments in our industry right now, supporting
Yeah, I
all
can
those
imagine.
even more complex, crazy monetization models. That's one huge drivers. Then, of course, there's the machine learning, which is a big component, and event sourcing there again also plays a connected role to that. Very valuable data source, generating a lots of data which we can use to learn behaviors of our customers, and there's lots of development going on there, right? We want to go towards chatbots, or we are using chatbots a lot for cost optimization. We want to get to know our customers even better. What is the best product for you to buy next? What's the best thing for you to do next? What's the next thing you might do, right? So those are areas that there are lots of investments and developments in ongoing. Yeah.
I see. Yeah, so very, very different from the years of the past, where I remember as a kid we used to dial the phone and it was this like rotary thing that just went da, 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 for each number. We're far, far, far away from that, which is really exciting stuff. So it's really fascinating, and I really, really appreciate you giving me your time today and explaining really tiny bits of it, really, because I'm imagining there is just a million other things that's happening at the same time that I can't even wrap my head around at the moment. But there's just a lot, and managing it and making those decisions, it's a big responsibility, I'm sure. And so I appreciate you spending some time with me today, explaining some of it to me, and kind of walking me through your process of how you ended up with CQRS and event sourcing from your monolithic system. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much, Pieter, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for listening to my talk with Pieter. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please join me next time for other exciting and fascinating topics. Until then, have a great time and happy coding.